Hi everyone, thanks for coming. My name is Tom Lee, I'm Curator of New Media at the National Media Museum. I'm here today to tell you about a very exciting project we've been working on. We're about to launch the world's first gallery that looks at the internet and its social impact, the history of the internet and its social impact that it's had in the very short space of time it's been around. It's called Life Online, opens next week. I'm also delighted to be joined by Dr. Vint Cerf, who's been a massive supporter of the gallery. I interviewed him last year when he was here in Oxford. We used that content has been totally invaluable to the gallery, as I'm sure you've seen outside. It's used all over the place in the gallery, telling the history and the story of the internet. Also, a big thanks to Virgin Media for setting up this event as well. Thank you. So a little bit more about Life Online. Outside really is just a sneak preview. It's actually two galleries at the museum. The first is a permanent gallery telling the history of the internet from the very first experimental messages on the ARPANET through to the rise of email, the birth of the web, modern social networking today and beyond. You also get to drive the content yourself as an audience member through interactives, lots of animation, big screen projection, lots of objects. And you might have been doing a little bit of recording outside. So this is for an interactive called Your Life Online, where you get to comment on what your own life online is like now, first time you use the internet, where you think it's going, how you view the internet today. So you actually become a star of the internet and drive the gallery and drive the content yourself. There's also a temporary gallery upstairs, which will change every year, responding to new and current themes. And the first inaugural exhibition is entitled Open Source. So this is a reflection of the open source ethos and the collaborative culture that has grown up around the internet, and tying back into Vint Cerf's and Bob Kahn's initial model of TCP/IP and keeping it an open internet, and also Tim Berners-Lee's dream of the web, of an open universal space. We've commissioned some new digital interactive elements, new artworks, which are very hands-on, very creative, and you get to build the gallery and collaborate yourself with your other audience members. And also looks at the future of the medium and how long it will remain truly open. We've brought a little bit of the gallery down here to London, and it opens next to the public next Friday on the 30th. We've got a sneak preview on Thursday the 29th as well, our kind of big VIP launch where Vint Cerf will be Skyping in. So if you can make it next week, that'd be fantastic. And now it's time to welcome Vint and open the floor to questions. But I'd just like to ask the very first one. When you were developing the internet all the way back in the 70s and the internet protocols, did you ever think it would be what it is today?
Well, of course, the preferred answer to this question is, of course we did. I mean, it's all happening exactly according to the schedule. Let's see, tomorrow morning, the next thing should be happening. I wish I could tell you that. There are really, the short answer, of course, is no, but it's not a complete answer either. Really, when Bob Kahn and I were starting the design work of what you know of as Internet in 1973, we already had 4 years of experience with the ARPANET, the predecessor experiment in packet switching. And that experiment was publicly demonstrated in October of 1972, just before Bob went to ARPA and I went to Stanford University, where we collaborated on the internet design. So we had email available by that time in 1971. We had seen the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center with its personal computers that cost $50,000 each at the time, were running on Ethernets by May, June, July of 1973. So we saw Douglas Engelbart's work at SRI International, where he had, for all practical purposes, a mini World Wide Web on one computer. He had hyperlinking of documents to each other. He had portrait mode displays that made things look like black on white paper. He invented the mouse so you could point to things on the screen. And oh, by the way, in addition to the mouse, he had a 5-fingered keyboard and a foot treadle. And the foot treadle was so when you were editing a document and you wanted to know whether the blank spaces were carriage returns or tabs or something else, you could make them visible by pushing down on the foot treadle. So and that was available online through the ARPANET. So the point I want to make here is that we actually had a lot of evidence of how powerful this technology could be. The second thing is that we made some very conscious decisions about the design of the network in anticipation that things would happen in the future that we couldn't predict, but we knew what their nature would be. Example, the packets of the internet can be carried by any technology that can move a bag of bits from point A to point B with some probability greater than 0. That's all we asked of the underlying technology. So we knew by this independence of the underlying transmission technology that every time a new technology came along, it could theoretically be brought in to be part of the internet. So before, optical fiber hadn't even been around in any useful and accessible way in 1973, but by 1981 or 82, it was starting to be used. But there was, just to go geek on you, there was X25 in 1976, there was frame relay, there was asynchronous transfer mode, there was multi-protocol label switching, there's the GPON and the passive optical fiber. All kinds of things have occurred, have been developed over a period of time. All of them can carry internet packets, and we knew that, and we planned for it. The one thing that we didn't do too well was figuring out how many things could be on the internet. In 1973, we sort of thought, A, it's an experiment, and B, let's see, it's expensive to build a national scale network, so maybe there would only be 1 or 2 per country. And at the time, there were, 130 countries or something. So we said, well, maybe we could have 256 networks, 2 per country, and then some number of computers, 16 million of them, would be enough to essentially account for all the machines that we'd have to worry about. Now, you have to remember, this was a time in the 1970s when the machines that were available, A, were expensive, B, they were large scale by those terms back then, and C, they were used by several thousand people at a time. Time sharing, big large scale time sharing machines were the most common available. And so we thought, well, there would be a smaller number of large scale machines used by 1,000 or 10,000 people. And so 16 million of those ought to be enough per country. Well, we ran out of the IP version 4 32-bit address space in February of 2011. So we're now out of that address space, and we're all in the middle of pushing very hard to get the new packet format, IP version 6, which was standardized in 1996, to be implemented in a widespread way. It has 128 bits of address space. That's 3.4 times 10 to the 38th addresses, which is 340 trillion addresses. That's a number only the Parliament would appreciate, but that number is enough to cover the uses of the internet for the foreseeable future until after I'm dead, then it's somebody else's problem. So we will collectively implement and turn on and leave on the IP version 6 addressing structure in parallel with IP version 4 on June 6, 2012. So that's going to be an important date in the history of the internet. So I could go on, but I won't.
No.
The point here is that we planned for a lot of the things that happened. The thing that we didn't really appreciate is what happens when 2.5 billion people decide to get online and share information with each other and interact. We also didn't really fully appreciate what happens when you carry your information window in your pocket or on your hip or in your purse. The fact that we have these smart phones that have the ability to access the internet and either push information into it or pull information out of it is dramatic, because you have the ability to either generate or consume information anytime, anywhere, when you can get mobile access. So that plus Wi-Fi has created an online continuous kind of environment that we didn't really appreciate at the time, because at the time we were doing the work, you had to go sit down at a terminal somewhere that was wired into a computer someplace. And that's not true anymore. And so this breaking of the bounds of access to information is transforming. That's why this museum is so, or the gallery in particular, is so important, because it'll give us some perspective on what happens when you break all those tethers and allow people to get access to content wherever they happen to be and whatever they want.
Thank you, fantastic. I could ask you questions all day, but I won't be greedy. So I'd like to open it to the floor. Has anyone got any questions for Vint?
Shall I stand just here? In terms of the Internet of Things that you talked about, do you have ideal scenarios for the home and the workplace in terms of what can actually be connected?
So what's actually going to happen with these things? And do I have to worry about a cyber attack from my refrigerator, for example? So the first observation is that the most concrete example of the Internet of Things is already here. We have things like picture frames that dynamically download imagery from a website and then rotate through it. There are a variety of devices like that. There are the game devices that are also appliances that are online. When we get to office equipment, for example, the printers have been online forever. What would be nice is if you could get remote access to them in the same way that people send faxes. So instead of sending a fax, you could just print on somebody else's machine. It's pretty clear, though, that we don't want to have the problem of people printing, using up your ink and your paper when you don't want them to. So access control now becomes an important issue. A more interesting possibility is the 3D printers. I don't know if you've been following that, but it's an emerging story. You can imagine printing out things that you could make, or imagine movies come out and they have these little action figures. You could print out your own action figure from the 3D printer. I don't know if anybody's actually doing that, but you can imagine this sort of thing evolving. I've seen some 3D printers that are not just printing things. One of them prints food. Now, of course, the ink cartridge now has to be filled with something that's edible, and if you, I don't know what happens if who's liable if you leave food in the cartridge too long and some bacterium gets into it and then you eat it. Now, so it could be a problem. Liability is always an issue in this space. So the appliances around the house, the ones that are most immediately obvious candidates for being online are the entertainment systems. And what's interesting about putting an appliance online is that as soon as you do that, you create an opportunity for someone else to help manage it, either to do something to it or to gather information from it. In the US, there's something called the Smart Grid program. In Japan, they call it Smart Neighborhood, and perhaps there's something here in the UK or in Europe that's similar. The whole idea is to get electricity-consuming appliances not only to report their usage, but also to respond to the possibility that you're reaching a peak load. And gee, if you don't really have to run the dishwasher right now or heat the water in the water heater, would you please postpone that for another 15 minutes? Now, you want the consumer to have some incentive for acquiring appliances like that. And one obvious incentive is that if the price of electricity goes up according to demand, this is demand-based pricing, then you actually want to know that you should suspend the use of electricity if necessary, or if possible, during that peak load to save money. That's also good for the power generating guys because they don't have to build excess power generation equipment, which is very expensive from the capital point of view, and it's only used 2% of the time. And so you can see why the cost would go up. If you build something to generate electricity, you use it only 2% of the time, it's 50 times more expensive for that kilowatt hour than it would be if it's something that's used all the time. So avoiding the construction of unnecessary power generation is an important economic outcome. So on the personal side, some of you, I think, are already beginning to explore what's called augmented reality. This is, Google Goggles is a good example of that. It's an application where you hold up your mobile, take a picture of something, and Google tries to figure out what it is. Now, we don't have images of everything, so we don't do a really great job of all kinds of images, but we're pretty good about book covers, wine labels, famous landmarks, and things of that sort. And as the system gets more and more data, it will be more and more intelligent about responding. So if you show a picture of a building, and if it's ever appeared in the street view, for example, we might actually be able to figure out, oh, that's at the corner of X and Y, and you're facing that building now, or it's behind you. Speaking about Street View, you probably have heard about the internet-enabled cars that we have driving around in San Francisco. For a while, until a few weeks ago, I actually thought that the cars were 100% autonomous. I turned out to be wrong. Now, these things have driven in San Francisco for 200,000 miles without any accidents. Well, there was one. Somebody rear-ended the car. That wasn't our fault. But what I didn't understand about the cars is that in addition to having radar and LiDAR and GPS information and cameras and everything else, they also are online while they're driving. And this allows several things to happen. The first thing is that our system is getting information from the cars about what does it look like where you are right now. And that information can be used to help navigate. So when a car shows up at a place it's never been at, it learns all the things that other cars have already learned about that space. And an example of a reason why you need to do that is that you drive up, let's say, to a stop sign, and you recognize it's a stop sign, so you stop. And there's a tree over here. Now, remember, this is a computer program driving. It's not as smart as, a 4-year-old kid. So it doesn't know it's a tree. For all it knows, it might be a pedestrian. And if the software just waited for the tree to cross the street, this probably wouldn't work out too well. But the fact that every other car that's passed that intersection has seen the same tree leads you to the conclusion it's a tree and not a pedestrian, so you don't have to wait for it to cross the street. And it's not going to leap out, unless it's an ant, in which case we're in Middle Earth and it's a whole other story. So this business of being online really creates some fascinating possibilities that you couldn't do otherwise. And I'm not sure that I could predict what all the outcomes are going to be. One of them is very clear, though, is strong authentication of parties who should or should not have access to or ability to control the device is important. Now, I have an instrumented house. What else did you expect of a geek, right? So I've got these little IPv6 radios all around the house with temperature sensors, light level sensors, and humidity sensors. Every 5 minutes, they're gathering that data and storing it away on a drive down in the basement in a rack of equipment. So, apart from that being the sort of thing a geek would do, why else would you do that? Well, at the end of the year, I now have a year's worth of very accurate information about how well the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system actually works. So the consequence of that is that when I want to go in and let's say, retune the HVAC, I can do that with real data as opposed to anecdotal stuff. Now, the wine cellar is a whole other story. I'm very concerned about the temperature below 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and I want to keep it above 40 degrees or 40% humidity. So that one is alarmed. And if the temperature goes up above 60 degrees Fahrenheit, I get an SMS on my mobile. This actually happened once. Power went out, the cooling system stopped working, and I was on a 3-day visit to Argonne National Laboratory, and as I'm walking into the building, the mobile goes off. It's the wine cellar calling, saying, you've just broken through the 60-degree temperature barrier. My wife wasn't there for 2 weeks on some trip, so nobody was there to turn the cooling system back on. So every 5 minutes for the next 3 days, I kept getting a little note saying, your wine is warming up. So I got home. I called the guys that make the sensor equipment, and I said, do you make remote actuators? And they said yes. And I said, great, do they have strong authentication on them? Because I don't want the 15-year-old next door to reprogram the wine cellar while I'm away. And they said yes, so we installed that. So now I have the ability to reset the cooling system. Now there's more to this story, I won't bore you with it all, but the point I want to make is that as soon as you make things internet capable, you create opportunities for other people to invent ways of helping you manage them or of analyzing the information that is important to you, especially if you want to do something about your electricity bill or your water bill or the gas bill or the oil bill, etc. Okay, long answer to a good question. Thank you. Who's next? Yes, please.
Hi, you've been telling how amazing the internet is, but I'm wondering, what is the negative aspect of the internet? Can you expect something to be like from the movie Space Odyssey and Hal saying, I'm sorry, Dave, I can let you do that?
Okay, so this is a very reasonable question, and it's a good example of how infrastructure technology can be abused. So let's pick on a couple of other infrastructures in order to see what we do about it. The road system is another shared infrastructure. The internet is a shared commons, if you like. And in the case of the road system, people get in their cars and they drink and they drive. And we tell them, don't do that. It's a not good combination, but they do it anyway. So what do we do about that? Well, we know that we can't absolutely stop people from doing it. That we can tell them don't do it. We can even make laws that say if we catch you doing it, there will be consequences, like we'll take your driver's license away, or you'll have to pay a fine, or both. So the question is what to do about people that abuse the use of the internet commons. And one answer may turn out to be something like the ones that we do for drinking and driving. We say, well, ideally, if you could actually stop people from doing some bad thing, that would be good. I mean, if you could write technology that prevents it. The problem is that sometimes when you try to build in absolute guarantees that something cannot be done, you also prevent some of the most valuable and useful things from happening. And so now you have to figure out how to balance that. That is what, by the way, led to a lot of the arguments over the bills in the United States called PIPA and SOPA. They were well-intended when it came from the point of view of the movie industry and the music industry, but they had a very direct and, in fact, devastating impact on a new security system that we were putting into the internet to protect people from hijacking of domain names. So the technical community said, wait a minute, we understand what it is that you have in mind, but it's going to break the system that we just spent the last 15 years implementing and getting deployed. So in that particular case, trying to prevent the problem absolutely by using technology doesn't work. Sometimes it does. Sometimes you can do that. If you can't, then you want to use the detection and punishment, so to speak, which says if we catch you, then there will be consequences. And then there's another thing that you can do, the third one, and that is to use moral suasion to say, you know what, this is a bad thing to do. Don't do that. Bullying would be an example of that. There is one other element of the suasion side of the equation that I'd like to suggest. The music industry was greatly exercised by the fact that you can copy and redistribute digital music as well as digital movies. And so they were very worried about that. And they were afraid that their business model was not going to work anymore. And they were right, because their business model was sell an album even if the consumer only wanted one song. So Steve Jobs, recognizing this in his amazing way, says, well, why don't we let them buy the songs instead of the whole album, or in addition as an alternative. So iTunes comes along and basically says, people should still pay for their music, but we give you an option that you might like better than the ones that were being made before. Too many of the people in the industry, of intellectual property industries, are focused on old ways of protecting the content and don't necessarily have, I don't know what, the imagination to imagine an alternative kind of business model that might be just as good or even more attractive to consumers. So the third suasion also has to do not just with moral suasion, but it has to do with alternatives for people to choose among in order to enjoy the use of the net. But you're quite right that this is a two-edged sword, and there are bad things that can be done with it. I will, however, argue that there are more good things that have been done on the net than there have been bad things, and there will be more good things, even more good things in the future. And so we should be very careful to make sure that we don't lose the benefit of all that. And I hope that the gallery will prove that to be correct. But I hope the gallery is also cognizant of the need to make both of those stories available. Mm-hmm. Okay, other questions?
We're okay for time. Yeah. Any other questions?
How could this be such a reticent group? You're people who write things all the time. You should be challenging. I'm sorry, it's bad. I shouldn't be beating you up, right? That Vint Cerf is a jerk, right? Okay, well. All right, well, if you don't have other questions, can I just offer one other little thing? This is something I hope you get into the museum, because we really need to track this. Some of you know that I've been working since 1998 with the Jet Propulsion Laboratory as a visiting scientist there. And in the course of the last 14 years or so, we have developed technology for the extension of the internet to operate across the solar system. The purpose behind this is not to listen to little Martians or something. It is to help support manned and robotic space exploration. We wanted a richer networking capability than a point-to-point radio link, which is what we were faced with for the last 40 years or so. Now, what has gotten very interesting about this is that not only have we designed the protocols and iterated on the design for several years, we've implemented them. They're on the space station. They're on board the spacecraft, the Mars Science Laboratory that's going to land on Mars, hopefully safely, in August of this year. They're on board the Epoxy spacecraft, which has now visited 2 comets. It's in orbit around the Sun, not around Earth. And we are now working with something called the Consultative Committee on Space Data Systems to standardize those protocols so that all of the spacefaring nations, including the European Space Agency, can use those protocols if they want to. And I hope they do, because after we've launched a spacecraft to perform a particular mission, as we would do for the like the orbiters around Mars, they were designed to look down and help us figure out where the rovers should land. But they completed that mission before the rovers landed. After the rovers landed, we discovered a need to relay data back to Earth that we couldn't get directly from the rovers on the surface of Mars. We reprogrammed the orbiters to become relays in a network. So this is a sort of a worked example of a store and forward packet-based network that has gotten 99.9% of all the data back off Mars. So I want all of those scientific spacecraft to become nodes of an interplanetary network, because then I can use them to repurpose them as part of an expanding communication system for both manned and robotic space exploration. But it gets better. Just a few weeks ago, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, which funded the original ARPA network, which funded the internet work, which funded the interplanetary architecture work, has now funded a new project. It's a study, so we're not actually implementing something. It's a study about the design of a spacecraft to get to the nearest star in 100 years. Now, there are some problems getting to the nearest star in any case. Current propulsion systems would take us 65,000 years to get to the nearest star. That's a little long even for a DARPA experiment. So we have to design a new kind of engine. Probably it would be a nuclear engine using ion-based propulsion. It would have to last for 100 years. And it has to get up to about 20% the speed of light. Whether we can actually do that, we don't know. We have a long time to accelerate anyhow. But then we have to decelerate, because if we don't, we'll zip through that star system, we'll get 2 photographs and that's it. So it's not a very good scientific outcome. So we have propulsion is one of the problems. Communication is the other one, and that's the more interesting one, because that's the part I'm worried about. How in the heck do you generate a signal from 4 light years away that you can actually detect? And even if it's a narrow beam laser, it's going to beam spread over a 4 light year distance. And forget about command and control, right? Because the spacecraft is flying off as fast as it can go, and the round trip times for communicating with it will keep getting longer and longer. Think about a quarter of the way on the journey. It's a light year away. That means it takes a year for a signal to propagate to the spacecraft and back. And so, that's not a very rapid and efficient conversation. And in fact, it won't do for mid-course correction. I mean, normally you have this conversation with the spacecraft and you say, go over here just a little bit for about 30 microseconds, and that will get you into orbit around Mars so you can land. You don't have the opportunity to do that, so navigation is going to have to be very autonomous. But we do want to get information coming back. So my current favorite guess, which is just a guess, is that if we build a laser which is capable of sending a pulse that's 10 to the minus 15th seconds long, a femtosecond, you can take energy like 10 or 100 watts, compress it to 10 to the minus 15th, which means that the pulse is 10 to the 15th times bigger than 100 watts. It would be 10 to the 17th watts for that very brief moment. That should be detectable, even from 4 light years away. However, the beam spread will still be a problem. So now I have to figure out, how do I gather the energy from a signal that has spread over a 4 light year distance? Now you know why I need the interplanetary backbone, because I need to build a synthetic aperture receiver, which is about the size of the solar system, in order to detect the signal coming back from the spacecraft that's on its way to Alpha Centauri. Now, this is serious stuff. It's real engineering. It's not science fiction. And it's really cool to be part of a project, even if I know I won't be around for this thing to actually happen. But just having to sit around thinking about solving problems like that is more fun than you could possibly imagine. It's like being in the middle of a science fiction story and being the guy that's turning science fiction into reality. So, you didn't ask that question, but I wanted you to know about that anyway.
Thank you.
I've got a question.
Yes, sir.
Can I stand there? Or should I stand
That's all right. I can.
Okay. So, Apple would have us think we're in a post-PC world now, where it's tablets and cloud computing rather than PCs and local processing, which is a little bit like the terminals and mainframes of a while ago.
Right.
So, is this a resurgence, do you think, of basically a computing system of long ago, or is it a genuine revolution?
So this is actually really peculiar. It's a very interesting question. For one thing, those of you who either know the history or live the history like I have, originally we had time-sharing machines tethered to terminals, which didn't do anything. They just typed characters in and out, displayed them on the screen. Everything that you got on the screen came from the computer that was off in the distance. That's what a cloud-type thing looks like. The browser, like our Chromebooks, for example, is just a browser. And the only thing you see on the screen is what the computer in the cloud is sending. So it's like the re-implementation of the old time-sharing environment. Mm-hmm. My friends hate it when I say cloud computing is time-sharing on steroids. And they say, well, it's more than that, and they're right. But this is... So in a sense, we have gone back to a particular mode of interaction. The thing that's different is that the cloud capacity is unbelievably big. I mean, the capability to do a computation by drawing literally millions of processors together at once for a brief period of time is dramatically different than what we had with this little time-sharing, one computer time-sharing system. So that part's different. I think that we still have this problem of learning to interact effectively with the computing resources. I appreciate our ability to do speech understanding. It's better now than it ever was, but it's still not as precise as typing something in. And so I believe that we will end up still wanting to make use of keyboards. We will certainly make more and more use of audible input and certainly audible output. Those of you who've used the Google navigation tools on the mobile and have it tell you turn by turn where to go, or have asked, where's the Science Museum, and it knows where you are implicitly because you allowed it to know that. It answered a question which can only be answered if the system A knows where you are and B understands where it is you want to go. So I'm not willing to accept an argument that all of these older notions of laptops and desktops, or laptops especially, are simply going to go away and be replaced by notepads. I really think input is important for the composition of content. But I am willing to accept that as time goes on, the devices that we use to interact with the system will be more and more natural to interact. I was up at MIT Media Lab a couple of weeks ago, spent 3 hours. Wonderful place. If you get an opportunity, you should go there. So they were showing me some robotic devices that could see and hear in the same way that we can. They could navigate. And the idea was that they were sort of partners with us in the course of a conversation. So I'm talking to another person, we're discussing how to solve a problem. Everything we were seeing and talking about could be heard and seen by this little robot. Now, the idea behind this is that it could become a partner in our natural human interaction mode, as opposed to having to turn to it and type something in, or take a microphone and somehow get its attention, like on Star Trek, where they would always say, computer, and who was it, Major Roddenberry would say, computing. So I think that we may discover that our world is changed by being able to bring computers into the same environment that we're in, have it see what we're seeing. When we ask the question, what is that building? That's a meaningful question, because the computer is seeing the same building we are. Now, we don't really get to do that in a very convenient way now. I mean, we have to pick up our mobile and take a picture and say, what is that, as opposed to pointing at it. So the idea that the computers can be part of our gestural and spoken environment could change our view of the partnership that we have with this kind of computing capability. We know that computers can do some things better than we do, and they can do it a lot faster than we can. We do things better than they do. Why don't we find a way to make those two things work more comfortably together? So instead of having to type a search query into the Google search engine, for example, not only do I want to speak, but I literally want to have a conversation about what it is I'm trying to do. And I want the computer to understand enough of that to help me find the answer to what it is I'm looking for, as opposed to having to repeatedly type in more and more refined or carefully adjusted searches. I want a partner. I don't just want a tool. And I think we are getting closer and closer to the possibility of that happening. And I can hardly wait to watch that story come out of the gallery as you document the evolution of this technology and its impact on us. So there's somebody else that you need to talk to. His name is Lee Rainey, and he has a book coming out soon. Lee is one of the researchers at the Pew Institute, and he has been tracking an American use of the internet for probably, I want to say a decade. I may be overstating it, but certainly 8 years at least. But the reason it would be interesting to have you talk to him is he may be able to give you some sense of what we have measured and found out so far, and that would tell us what kinds of artifacts and what kinds of stories we should try to put into the gallery to characterize what's happening to us in this online environment.
Well, the gallery's been built so that it's easily updatable and it's flexible and it's dynamic, so it will change over time and stay up to date.
Is it accessible online?
Yes, parts of it.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
this
yeah.
is really important because I work with the American Smithsonian Institution on various projects, and the thing that I'm most eager to do is to make sure that people have an opportunity to visit before they get there, to help plan what they want to do things while they're there, but have the ability to remind themselves or be reminded, I want to follow up on this idea. I mean, that could be just holding your mobile next to a sensor and having a near-field capacitor detect that you're there, pick up your ID, and then send you an email saying you were at this station and you wanted to be reminded that you wanted to pursue that. And more important, they want you to be able to follow up afterwards. So the museum experience wants to be something that can happen over a period of time and doesn't require you to be physically present at all times. And so you want it to be before, then, and after, all three. And that will contribute, I think, a lot to the value of that museum and the gallery in particular.
No, that's part of the design, and that's how we built
Good
it.
man. That's the right idea.
But no, I'd like to thank you all for coming, and thank Vint especially for coming along and volunteering your time for this. It's fantastic, and showing your support for the gallery. Big thank you to Virgin as well for setting up this event. I'll be around, me and Caroline will be around from the museum for the next hour or so if you want to carry on looking at any of the interactives or videos out there. And I know you're a very...
I'm going to hang around and have a
okay.
look too. I haven't had a chance to see very much of this yet, so maybe if you want to have a little informal chats, we can do that too.